just sort of wastes some time. So Kelly Talbert downstairs thinks that he's taking a bath and putting on clean clothes. I don't know what Dee does. He organizes his sock drawer. But he finally comes back down in his second cleanest clothes, and Talbert sees him and says, "Well, you know, while you're upstairs, angels have already been talking to me." And Dee says, "Oh, really? What'd they say?" And Talbert says, "They say that you should take a bath and put on your clean clothes." And, you know, whether or not the angel told him that or if he was just a pretty smart cookie, Dee was impressed. So he went upstairs, took a bath, put on his clean clothes, and he and Kelly marched into the holy room there, and Kelly almost immediately, after Dee whined and prayed for a while, almost immediately got the image of the Archangel Uriel, and thus began an almost 4-year magical operation. And in my mind, at least, it is Dee kept such wonderful records of what he and Talbert, who later changed his name to Kelly, Dee kept such good records of their operations that they are, without question, the most remarkable magical operations ever recorded. And in my book, I try to at least demonstrate in a few places just how remarkable those operations were. And in the course of a little less than in 4 years, they received through angelic communications, or whatever you want to believe in your own mind angelic communications are, they received 3 magical systems whereby you can contact directly various angels and spiritual beings. And only in the last 90 days of their angelic workings did they receive what modern magicians have developed into what we call the Enochian magic system.
Right. Now, just to be clear for people listening, it's called Enochian because, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the same system of magic that was conveyed by these same angels to Enoch of biblical times.
Right.
Is that right?
The patriarch Enoch, who was, I don't know, he was just a couple generations removed from Adam. So Enoch talked directly to God, and God talked directly to Enoch. And when God was busy, Enoch talked with God's secretaries, his angels. And so the whole idea of talking directly with the direct representatives of deity could fall under the very, very generic term Enochian, just like Enoch, in other words. And there was a period in the second magical system where Dee was obsessed with trying to find the lost book of Enoch, which is has played in the imagination of the Judeo-Christian mind for millennia.
Right.
And so there was a period in their operations when when they really were trying to do very Enoch-y kind of stuff, less generic. But you're right there with the definition.
Okay. So you in your book you talk about, you said they go through sort of 3 stages of receiving different information and how to use it. So if you wouldn't mind, sort of, if we could get into those a little bit.
Yeah.
The first is called the Heptarchia Mystica. Is that right?
Right. And Heptarchia, the root hep, referring to things 7-ish.
Mm-hmm.
And excuse me, I think it's well to point out at the very beginning that when we're talking about magical systems and we're talking about how we look at the cosmos, we really only have one universe to work with. Okay, when we're talking about different magical systems, the Kabbalistic system that looks at the universe as divided, for convenience sake, into 10 levels of consciousness, like the tree of life diagram that many of us are probably familiar with, has 10 emanations from the mind of God, and at the very top, that's the consciousness of Godhead, and number 10 at the very bottom is how that all manifests as the material world, and everything in between is ascending levels of consciousness from matter all the way to Godhead. So that's one way of looking at the universe. Mm-hmm. Okay, and it works out just fine. And there's whole sets of a hierarchy of spiritual beings that represent, in metaphoric technicolor, these different levels of the consciousness of being. The Enochian system looks at the world in a little bit in a different way. It's the same world. It's the same reality. It's the same essence of being. It's the same universal consciousness that we're considering here. But the Enochians like to look at things in sevens. Mm-hmm. And well, I sort of use this imaginary conversation. Dee asks through Kelly, ask the angels if my friend Lasky is going to become the next king of Poland, which is kind of one of the real questions he asked. Mm-hmm. And the angels answered back, in Lon's imagination, yeah, we can tell you that. We can answer that question. But in order for us to play that answer through your receiver, you are going to have to understand how everything in heaven and earth is connected to everything else in heaven and earth. You are going to have to understand how an earth was created to have a Poland, to have a guy named Lasky. You're going to have to understand how this all is, how it's all put together.
So they were willing to help him if he was willing to receive their wisdom, essentially.
Well, that's the way it turned out, but it was even more practical than that. They're almost saying to D, yes, we can answer that, but for you to hear the answer, you're going to have to understand the universe where we can in which us answering that question is possible.
I see. Okay.
And and they said, well, it's only going to take a minute, And,
right.
Yeah. And so what they proceeded to do, and in going through the diaries and the records and the various books that Dee created from the diary records, it was clear that Dee had to hear this information in a certain way, or he couldn't hear it at all.
Good point. Yeah.
And Dee had, in order to hear such transcendent information, Dee had to use his own mind to overcome his own mind. He had to beat his mind at its own game.
Right.
And Dee's favorite games were ciphers, were codes. Right. As a matter of fact, even before Kelly showed up at Dee's door, Dee was trying to magically decode the mind of God. And he was trying to do it in this thing called the Book of Soiga. As a matter of fact, it was one of the first questions that, through Kelly, Dee asks the communicating angels, is my Book of Soiga of any excellence? Mm-hmm. And the angel said, oh, shit, yes. Oh, man. Oh, yeah, we use that with Adam. Yeah. And but what the Book of Soiga was, or the centerpiece of the Book of Soiga, was 49 pages, and each of the page contained a grid of 49 by 49 alphanumeric squares. Mm-hmm. 49 pages of 49 by 49 squares. Now, and I just in the book, I just try to demonstrate just with something very simple, just an alphanumeric square of just 9 squares, 3 by 3.
Right.
And the squares are numbered, and the squares, excuse me, squares contain letters, and I put just one more thing there, a planetary mm-hmm. attribute. So just to demonstrate the almost infinite amount of information or potential information that can be represented by that simple alphanumeric square. You can spell stuff with it. The square number 3, let's say, is not only means 3, but it means all things 3-ish. Mm-hmm. Something with a beginning, a middle, and an end. How many things have a beginning, a middle, and an end? Okay, right there you've got almost an infinite amount of things. You've got the universe itself,
Right, and it's quite intricate. I mean, anybody who's really sort of worked with the idea of the cube of space, to have a cube that has over 46,000 squares. Yeah. That's just amazing.
Yeah, and not only that, above those 46,000 squares, they contain the information that is held in their relative position to all other 46,000 squares. See,
mm-hmm. Right.
So we're really looking at as close as possible to a concept of infinite information. And if we think about what the physicists are now considering the Big Bang that created the universe, or out of which created the universe, the Big Bang began with an infinitely small, compact singularity. And if we could put that singularity under a microscope, the easiest way for us to wrap our minds around that would be the idea of a cube containing almost an infinite amount of alphanumeric squares. Everything that will eventually be the entire universe in all of its infinite variety is held in potentiality in that alphanumeric cube. And that's what D was trying to pick at. That's how D figured he was going to, the only way he was going to get this information is to actually have it presented to him as a code that he could crack. And that's how his mind worked. Now, gee, and it's sadly for us, the smartest guy in the world who liked codes is what we're left with to try to identify with how to use Enochian magic. God, I wish he was a plumber, you know?
Well, the irony is just off the charts, really, but it seems to fit somehow.
Right. So what, in the simple answer from the angels, yeah, we can talk to you like this, but first you're going to have to understand how the universe was created and how the universe is, where this communication is possible. And so they start communicating to D using alphanumeric squares, having him lay out grids and dictating one at a time, letter by letter, by rank, by column, then another grid of different numbers, and then another, and another, and another. And then one by one, they have him turn, bind them into a book and have him turn from, go to page 17 and, you know, column this and row that. Put a G in there. Then turn to, I mean, the tediousness of the creation of these a book of these alphanumeric squares, received letter by letter, one by one, with Kelly looking into a crystal ball and D writing them down, is just, it's almost mind-boggling that these guys would have the patience to do that.
Now this brings up an interesting question, and you talk about this a little in the book where you mention, you know, what would this system look like if it were dictated to someone who was, say, a shaman or someone that was a, you know, Chinese alchemist or something like that?
It'd look different.
Yeah, I mean, would you care to speculate at all as to whether or not you think that it was just a result of the way they could communicate with D himself, or whether they may have been looking for an individual who could receive this information, such as D, or is it both, or neither?
Yeah, you know, now we get on into the objectivity or the subjectivity of the angels themselves. First of all, the angels early on told Dee and Kelly that they were considered them one brain.
Okay.
And so it was a fortunate coupling of a gigantic left hemisphere and a gigantic right hemisphere. You know.
Interesting.
And so right there, it was obvious these two guys really clicked. They really clicked, and whenever they had difficulties, and they had a lot of difficulties, personal difficulties with each other throughout the whole thing, they ended up just hating each other. But whenever there was difficulties, it was always when each of their personalities was trying to get in the way. It was truly obvious that the communicating intelligences, or at least they acted as such, they looked like, wow, we've got something really good here. Let's try to get something through. You know.
You're right.
And we can look at it that way, maybe metaphorically, or maybe that's just a metaphor for how these two remarkable men were dealing with consciousness. But their dealings at least appeared, if we want to look at it all metaphorically, and that the angels, instead of being, guys with feathers, these were just how this cosmic information, this very generic and impersonal cosmic information, could be grasped by the limited meat brains of these two guys. But so I don't want to take all the romance out of it and act like I don't believe in angels. That I just think that they're levels of consciousness that we can only understand through the metaphor of angels. But that's kind of how I feel.
Well, I mean, a lot of the literature on this subject tends to indicate, there's a value in looking at it in both ways simultaneously, if that's at all possible. But
well, I have to look at it that way. And for the practical aspects of magic, of course, you buy into, if only for the duration of the ceremony, you buy into the classic objectivity of the reality of these things as spiritual entities.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, there's never been anything quite like the Dee and Kelly partnership. And but like you suggest, if Dee hadn't have been this wild, crazy, genius mathematician cryptographer, his shamanistic experience would manifest differently. One of the good things about having it happen, coming through Dee, is that it happened in the English language,
mm-hmm.
and that and in almost, relatively speaking, modern times, dealing with historic events that we can refer to in a very empirical way, and in language we can understand, because Dee was a mathematician, and math is a language itself that transcends spoken language. Right. Math, like music, is a universal thing.
Mm-hmm.
But first off, what they wanted to do is create a similar thing to the Book of Soiga, Dee's own private kind of version of a Book of Soiga, and after a while, what they were left with was a large, thick folio of alphanumeric squares of different sizes, and they were all filled in, and then that was their equivalent of that pre-Big Bang singularity.
Right.
Okay. And then, well, what happens when the Big Bang happens? Okay, the singularity pops open, and in masonry, or certain degrees of masonry, or particularly certain degree in Freemasonry. There's this very dramatic scene of a white cube, that at a dramatic part of the ritual, the cube pops open and becomes a cross.
Mm.
And in the middle of the cross, or at the arms of the cross, is a beautiful red rose of 49 petals.
Interesting.
And when the Big Bang singularity pops open, there's 5 major stages of the Big Bang. But what happens step by step is all this potential universe starts to expand as this plasma energy, and it expands at this incredible rate. We could say speed of light, but there is no light yet to clock speed. Okay, mm-hmm. It expands, creating space as it goes along, and but all of these, let's say, particles, all these little alphanumeric things, as the expansion continues, they start to clump up with each other and form what eventually is going to be the building blocks of matter. Mm-hmm. Okay, and then eventually that cools down, and then other forces start to happen. When there's enough matter, gravity is created. Okay, and it continues to expand and expand until primitive elements are formed, helium and hydrogen, and then there's enough matter that's clumped up together. In other words, it's like all of this potential expands and then crystallizes, then distills. The stars were distilled. The gravity was distilled from all of this infinite potential. Mm-hmm. Things cool off, and instead of this infinite white heat that we saw at first, all of a sudden now we see smaller things. We see stars and eventually planets, and eventually we get to the universe as it is today. And what the angels were doing with Dee and Kelly, they're starting off with this huge book of alphanumeric squares. Then they showed them how to step by step distill those squares into smaller squares. Like this is the square of gravity. This is the square of hydrogen. This is okay. And then they distilled those squares into smaller and smaller squares, and distilled those squares into smaller and smaller squares until they got a usable set of alphanumeric squares that more or less represents the manifest universe as it stands today. And then out of those squares, they show them how to build this wonderful holy table. They show them how to build a lamen that the magician wears around his neck that links the magician to the holy table. They show them. Then they have a hierarchy of spirits. And here comes the answer to your heptarchic question of 45 minutes ago. The heptarchic thing was a set of 49 spirits, a set of kings, a set of princes, and a set of 5 ministers. And those are called the heptarchic angels. And they all deal with all of these squares that were condensed one after the other into sets of 7.
Wow.
And it's maybe I'm not. As a matter of fact, I'm sure I'm not communicating this to you because I took 3 years to try to make it more understandable with in the book. But I try to take us step by step through this. I guess we could call it the Enochian Big Bang idea.
Yeah, and frankly, in the book, I think you do a fantastic job. I mean, it's clear the amount of work, not just the receiving of these tables, but the, like you said, distilling them down and working them to